from Civilization. The wrathful God Yahweh spits out an unmistakable message about labor. Work is a curse. When the first man is cast out of the garden, his punishment is to labor all the days of his life. The very word labor comes down to us unchanged from the original Latin. It means toil, hardship, distress. Just in case the meaning isn't perfectly clear, Yahweh also curses the woman with a different form of labor. I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow shalt thou bring forth children. Now, compare that biblical conception of labor with this very different view of the spiritual meaning of work. In the beginning, God ordained that man should labor, not as a curse, but as a blessing, not as a punishment, but as a means of development, physically, mentally, morally. These words come from an oath that was taken by the Knights of Labor. Founded in 1869 in Philadelphia, it was one of the first efforts to launch a nationwide labor union. I bring up these opposing quotes to remind us that Americans have always had a love-hate relationship with work. Since our Puritan days, we have seen it as a duty and as a source of human dignity. At the same time, the American dream is to save up enough money so that, at the earliest possible age, we can quit working for good. From childhood on, from the first time that we hear the recess bell, we are taught that work and play are opposites. We work because we have to. We play because we want to. In the words of the rock songwriter Lou Reed, some people like to go out dancing. Some people like us, we got to work. How do we resolve this contradiction? Is human labor a bane or a boon? The answer, I suggest, is that it can go either way. What makes us view it as a blessing or a curse is not the work itself, but the circumstances within which we do the work. We all know the Zen proverb that before enlightenment, one chops wood and carries water, and that after enlightenment, one chops wood and carries water. I don't claim to be a Zen monk, but I can tell you that I enjoy chopping wood if its destination is my barbecue pit, or if I'm trimming the trees around my house. I wouldn't enjoy it nearly so much if I were working for a lumber boss, especially if the boss was ignoring safety rules and was asking me to work unpaid overtime. Even in times of high unemployment, polls consistently show that more than half of all Americans are unhappy with their jobs. The past 3 decades have seen an explosion in employees who leave corporate jobs to do essentially the same work for themselves. In a recent survey by the firm Intelligent Office, 65% of U.S. employees aspired to be entrepreneurs or independent workers. I quit my day job as a newspaper reporter back in 1990. I have been a freelance writer ever since. I've had no benefits. I've never earned as much as I did before 1990. But I consider it a fair trade. My compensation is that I have had time to pursue my other career, my music. And while wage slaves have been stuck in traffic on the freeway, my commute meanders from my bedroom to my coffee pot and back to my home office. It is hardly a new idea that working for yourself can be more satisfying than working for a boss. In a strange way, it was none other than Karl Marx who set the stage for today's entrepreneurs. Writing in 1844, at a time when peasants were moving from farms to factories, He coined the expression alienated labor. Marx was the first economist who paid any attention to labor, at least from the point of view of the laboring person. Work, he proposed, adds happiness and meaning to human life, as long as we are working for ourselves. We become alienated when we go to work for someone else. We are producing goods that have no meaning to us, in jobs that are soulless and repetitive, that we're doing just for the money. You don't have to be a Marxist to feel the sting of his words long before Dilbert, The Office, or Amazon warehouses. The worker sinks to the level of a commodity and becomes indeed the most wretched of commodities. He is at home when he is not working, and when he is working, he is not at home. Unfortunately, Marx did better at diagnosing alienation than at prescribing a cure. Political revolutions came and went, and in the words of another classic rock song, it was, "Meet the new boss, same as the old boss." A more effective remedy for alienated labor might be self-employment. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that 16 million Americans are currently working for themselves. But entrepreneurship is not for everyone. In fact, it's not for most of us. For every American who is self-employed, there are 10 who are not. There is a third way to end the alienation of labor. It is perhaps the most fruitful approach of all, because it's the path that created the American middle class. It can be summed up in a single word: organize. Which brings us to the U.S. labor movement. In union, as the saying goes, is strength. Since 1619, when Polish craftsmen went on strike in the Jamestown colony for the right to vote, the story of unions has been the ongoing effort of workers to take more control over the circumstances of their work and to make sure that they are fairly rewarded for it. A history of American unions would take up much more time than we have this morning, but a good bit of it can be summed up in the story of Labor Day and how it is that we came to celebrate it on the first Monday in September. Up until 1986 and Martin Luther King Day, Labor Day was the only federal holiday that did not commemorate either a war or a dead president. Samuel Gompers, the first president of the American Federation of Labor, put it this way: Labor Day differs in every essential way from the other holidays of the year in any country. All other holidays are in more or less degree connected with conflicts and battles of man's prowess over man, of strife and discord for greed and power. He's not completely right. Labor Day does commemorate conflicts and battles, which by one estimate have claimed at least 700 American lives since the 1850s. Some of them were killed by Union members, but most were killed by private guards and militias. Some were killed by U.S. soldiers and police officers. Historians Philip Taft and Philip Ross count 160 separate occasions on which state or federal troops have intervened in labor disputes. It was on September 5th, 1882, in the midst of the Gilded Age, that the first Labor Day March was held in New York City. It was designed as a show of strength by the Central Labor Union, but the organizers were afraid that the event might turn into a show of weakness, because many workers might be fired if they dared to take the day off. Writes Linda Stinson, a former historian for the U.S. Department of Labor. When the parade began, only a handful of workers were in it, while hundreds of people stood on the sidewalk jeering at them. But then, slowly they came. 200 workers and a band from the Jewelers Union showed up and joined the parade. Then came a group of bricklayers with another band. By the time they reached the park, it was estimated that there were 10,000 marchers in the parade in support of the workers. Over the next decade, 23 states declared Labor Day a holiday. But it took the first nationwide strike in 1894 to make it a federal holiday. The strike started in Chicago, where workers who made Pullman passenger cars were protesting a one-third cut in their pay. Within a month, the American Railway Union had launched a nationwide boycott of any trains that included Pullman cars, which meant almost every train. 150,000 workers walked out, and across much of the U.S., railroad traffic ground to a halt. President Grover Cleveland acted fast to bail out the bosses. Using the obstruction of U.S. mail as his pretext, he mobilized 12,000 federal troops to break up the strike. Cleveland said, "If it takes the entire Army and Navy of the United States to deliver a postal card in Chicago, that card will be delivered." Up to that point, the Pullman strike had been largely peaceful. But when troops reached Chicago, ironically, on Independence Day, they sparked 4 days of riots in which 700 rail cars were burned. In the midst of the mayhem, Cleveland was casting about for a way to repair his relationship with labor unions. In just 2 days, Congress unanimously passed a bill declaring the first Monday in September a national holiday. Even as he was preparing to send in the troops on June 28th, Cleveland signed the bill. That was 127 years ago. Today, we celebrate Labor Day with cookouts and fireworks. We drive long distances on congested freeways as one last gasp of summer. Ironically, we are marking the end of playtime and the resumption of our dreaded work. Unconsciously, though, you might say that what we're celebrating is the comforts that the labor movement has helped us to achieve. It's easy to take 8-hour days and 40-hour work weeks for granted. It's easy to forget that it took 100 years of bloody struggle to achieve the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which banned child labor, established the 40-hour week, and set the first federal minimum wage. As the bumper sticker puts it, unions, the folks who brought you the weekend. I sometimes hear these days, even from progressive friends, that we no longer need labor unions so much. The movement long ago achieved most of its goals, and now some unions are corrupt anachronisms that exist mainly to protect their own privileges. There is undeniably some truth in these charges. In the larger picture, though, I want to suggest a couple of reasons why unions might still be important to us all, whether or not we belong to one, even for a self-employed person like me. One reason is economic. Over the last 40 years, union membership has dropped by half, from 24% to 12% of American workers. Over that same 40 years, the median income of American households has stayed almost flat in constant dollars, except, of course, for the richest 1%. Their share of the nation's pre-tax income has soared from 10% up to 20%. Writes Unitarian minister David Breeden, "The American labor movement is the best anti-poverty initiative in United States history. Unions work because they go to the root of the poverty problem. They help human beings get paid fairly for a day's work." I want to suggest the other reason why labor unions still matter to us is more spiritual. For all of its shortcomings, organized labor has done more than almost any other segment of American society to push into reality our UU principles, in particular, justice and equity in human relations, and the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Writes Aaron McEmrys, a former union organizer who became a UU minister. Workers that I helped organize were prepared to risk everything: job, house, security, health care. They didn't risk everything for a 50-cent raise. Ultimately, the driving force behind any successful organizing campaign that I have ever been a part of is the need to be treated with respect and dignity. The need to have a voice in one's own working life. That is something that people are willing to risk everything for. That's why, in 1997, the UUA General Assembly called on congregations to work for, I quote, greater protection of workers, including the right to organize and bargain collectively, protection from unsafe working conditions, and protection from unjust dismissal. Although you won't hear about it in the daily paper or the cable news, there is still a lot to support. Over the past 2 decades, while traditional manufacturing unions have gone on shrinking, the frontier of the labor movement has shifted to the working poor. A union coalition called Change to Win has been organizing service industries like hotels, healthcare, and even fast food. They're changing the face of the labor movement, bringing in workers who are heavily female, minority, and immigrant. And they've had some notable successes. They've been instrumental in raising minimum wages to $15 in many parts of the country. So, this Labor Day, before we chow down on the grilled food of our choice, let us take a moment to raise a glass to the folks who brought us weekends. Let's consider that our creature comforts may have less to do with the benevolence of large corporations than with the courage and the fortitude of generations who worked for those corporations. Let us ponder the spiritual vision of the Knights of Labor when they vowed, labor is noble and holy, to glorify God in its exercise, to defend it from degradation, to divest it of the evils to body, mind, and estate which ignorance and greed have imposed, to rescue the toiler from the grasp of the selfish, is a work worthy of the noblest and best of our race.